Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Scott, and welcome to the first of a series of events which we're hosting through 2021 to mark the 10th anniversary of Brodie's in Aberdeen. I am the firm's managing partner. My own journey began in Bucksburn in 1970. I spent my childhood in Aberdeen and Inverurie, and I remain proud to say that that was my home. Our firm's journey itself, though, began in Aberdeen with the recruitment of one lawyer. He worked from his kitchen table in Mill Timber for the first few months. We then got an office in Cowden Place. We quickly outgrew that, and we leased our second office in Cowden Place shortly after that. We now, of course, are in our purpose-built new home in Brodie's house on Union Grove, which gives us space for the next chapter of our journey in the city. This year will see us reach the milestone of 100 colleagues in the city, each of them recruited individually. Indeed, it is my privilege when I'm in our office in Aberdeen to be able to say, because we grew that team organically, every single one of our colleagues is there by choice. We chose them and they chose us. That is, of course, a tremendously powerful thing to say. And it's an opportunity one doesn't always get when building a new team in what for us 10 years ago was a new city. 10 years on, of course, it is now as much our home as our Edinburgh and Glasgow offices. And those 100 folk, they give us a fair old reach into the private, the government and the business communities of Aberdeen and the North East. And we intend to write new chapters for our story in this second decade. So we set ourselves the objective during 2021 of ensuring that everyone in Aberdeen and the North East who's yet to hear our story is aware of our scale, of our reach and of our momentum. One way we thought we'd do that, of course, is to host a series of events, webinars at the moment, which we thought might be of interest to each of those communities. So today, we thought we would start by looking at the city itself and how we maintain its place in the pecking order to attract business, to attract investment and talent, and of course, as a centre of excellence. So 2021, it begins not with us looking into the eye of the COVID storm, but trying to plot our respective emergences from it. And as we do, of course, those longer term factors which will shape our futures become clearer to each of us. They include economic development, retention of talent, prestige for the city, and particularly, I think, in Aberdeen, the harnessing of the opportunities which are going to arise from the energy transition. And because it's our experience of the way our clients look at these things, we will this morning explore both the challenges that those factors present, but actually spend more of our time looking at the opportunities that they might bring, and also the underlying strengths of the city which they reveal. And so I'm delighted this morning that we're going to be joined by 4 guests who are absolutely qualified to share their perspectives on those factors. Their responsibilities encompass major infrastructure, education and research, innovation and support of thousands of businesses across the North East. So we are joined by Russell Borthwick, Chief Executive of the Aberdeen and North East Chambers of Commerce, by Professor George Boyne, Principal of Aberdeen University, by Myrtle Dawes, Solutions Centre Director for OGTC, and shortly, I hope, he is maybe experiencing some Zoom problems, Steve Whyte, the Director of Resources from Aberdeen City Council. So this event will take the format of a discussion. It'll be led by my fellow partner, Elaine Farquharson-Black. She will, I am sure, need no introduction to most of the people dialing into this session. She leads our planning team here in Aberdeen, but our reach and our interest range far and wide from that starting point. As well, of course, she has a professional and a personal interest in the sporting world. She is also, I would say, one of life's enthusiasts, and so she is perfectly placed to speak to our guests about the opportunity for the city in the years ahead. Elaine's going to lead the discussion, but we do want the session to be interactive. You can, of course, send questions to me through the Q&A function. If you do that, only the panelists will see them. But as many of you taking part in Zoom sessions will see, there is also a chat function, and in that case, everyone taking part in the session will be able to see the questions that you're asking. I'll try and catch them and interrupt the discussion that goes along and pick some of those up. So without further ado, I will hand you on to Elaine.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everybody. What is it that Socrates said, that the years wrinkle the skin, but lack of enthusiasm wrinkles the soul. So I'm trying not to have a wrinkly soul. And that's Socrates, the philosopher, as opposed to the footballer. I think as a sports person or a sports fan, then you're not only an enthusiast, you're an eternal optimist. No matter how you played today or your team played today, the next game might be the best game ever. That might be your best player. So for me, it's all about looking forward, and it's all about looking at how you improve. And I suppose add to that an unwavering belief that was instilled in me by my parents that if you want anything enough and you're prepared to work for it, then you can achieve anything. And so for me, I suppose I am an enthusiast. I see a world always full of possibility and always kind of full of opportunity. And that's why I'm excited and enthusiastic about Aberdeen and what we can do and what we can achieve together, you know, in the next 10 years. And I like to look at the positives in everything. So without trying to, you know, in any way ignore the challenges that we're facing, you know, I am really keen that we start to look forward together and start to look at, you know, what we envisage the city could and should look like, you know, in 10 years' time. You know, who's going to be living here, who's going to be studying here, who's going to be working here, how are we going to get around, you know, what's Aberdeen going to be known for? You know, that's, I suppose, my kind of key message. What are we going to be known for? And what do we have to do together, collectively, you know, to secure our city's success? And Nick, as you said, we've got four fantastic speakers here that are going to, you know, hopefully we'll touch on all your own areas, but then really to see how we can pull together and where there's opportunities for us, you know, to kind of to work together and deliver that kind of combined vision. And we're going to touch on kind of 4 topics, but you know, the discussion will evolve and grow as we kind of go along. And so I thought we would start with energy transition, big thing, obviously, in terms of the city. And Myrtle, I was going to start with you. Oil and gas has been at the heart of the city's economy for as long as I can remember. And then formed 4 years ago out of the city region deal, we've got OGTC. And it's got as its purpose, you know, supporting the oil and gas industry in developing and deploying technology to accelerate our transition to the net zero North Sea. And I know you recently published 2 papers, Closing the Gap and an integrated energy provision. Can you perhaps talk a little bit about the key findings of those reports and also maybe talk about what you hope to have achieved in the next 10 years' time?
All right, so thank you. So really delighted to be here, Elaine. I, in fact, started my journey in Aberdeen 30 years ago when I came as a graduate here to work for BP. So it's really good to see the transition actually in action, as I call it now. And maybe it's just useful for us to reflect on that, you know, when I joined the industry, there was concern around the industry, its longevity, peak oil. Those were the concerns at the time. So there was always going to be a time when we were going to be looking at what we're looking at now, which is what is the future and how are we going to bring our people and our skills and our innovation and ingenuity along into something different. So, I mean, OGTC started looking at this issue actually in 2017, because even though we did get started on an objective around maximizing economic recovery, it became clear then that the landscape was very much changing, which is why we opened our Net Zero Solutions Centre in 2019. So since then, we have pivoted our activities really to supporting the development and delivery of technologies for an affordable North Sea. And from that, I mean, a North Sea which has net zero oil and gas production, but also others. So we make space and actually embrace and integrate with wind, if there's solar, if there's all the marine resources which are there. And we should remember that there is quite a lot of that left. We've got the best prospective wind resources in Europe, actually 40% of it, and still an astonishing amount of gas, which we definitely will need, and that's as per the CTC report. So if we look at the 2 reports that we issued last year, the first one was on Closing the Gap, which was co-funded by the Scottish Government. And really, the aim of that was to really look at what is the technology landscape going forward to 2050. And we gave some kind of view of that today, 2035, 2050. And really also, what were the benefits in terms of jobs and economic output? Because there needs to be a reason why you're doing this. Because of course, we could always buy this technology in, and our play is that you can buy it in, but it will be better if we do it. I think the second thing that we published was the Integrated Energy Vision, which we did in conjunction with the Offshore Renewables Energy Catapult. It's a fantastic collaboration we're having with them, bringing the sectors together, making sure that the supply chains and the skills are going to be matched up. That's what we want to make sure we happen and accelerate the development of wind, especially offshore and floating wind. And that report really told us about what actions we probably needed to do in the North Sea. And it gave us an idea of the size of the prize and some of the scenarios which might lead us to, you know, how much hydrogen, is it green or blue, for example. Key messages I would put from that, though, are that we have a unique opportunity to be a supplier rather than an importer of energy. But to do that, we're going to need to invest decisively and astutely now so that we can become that world leader. And that there are actually, there's thousands of jobs both to retain and to actually grow, and an enormous amount of investment that will be needed to deliver that. And those are the three messages. I'll invite you to read the whole report, but those are the messages from that. And then I think in terms of our activities that we're doing, we are using that really to, I'll just again do three things. We're looking at how can we reduce the cost and efficiency and improve the efficiency of these new energy systems that we're going to put in place, which are going to be quite diverse and different. Because even though we do have technology now to do this, it's completely unaffordable from a customer perspective and would lead to a lot of fuel poverty. So we need to consider that right now. I think the second is that we really do need to move at pace, especially in the area of emissions reduction for oil and gas, because we need to make sure that as we diversify, we are staying true to the commitments being made by the government and our companies and what we want ourselves. And perhaps the last one is, as you know, we, in addition to technology development, we do have an entrepreneurs program. It's how we can nurture the technology developers and the entrepreneurs here in Aberdeen. So that's our perspective at the moment in terms of the energy transition, Elaine. Thanks,
Myrtle. And are there specific challenges that you think we faced, or are you quite comfortable that, you know, there are, I suppose it's the kind of SMART objectives, isn't it, that they are attainable?
So look, enormous challenges, mainly because we have to work cross-sector, and both the language, to some extent the behaviours, the regulatory regimes are different. So that is going to present enormous challenges, which though I think we should be up to achieving. It will require quite a lot of investment. On average, probably about, we're looking at 10 billion on average per year, which is not so different from what we've invested in oil and gas. But for some of the scenarios, it is very CapEx intensive, and we do need to get on top of that. I think thirdly, we need to move at a pace, which means that we don't lose the skills and make a trough for the people who might find that they're leaving one job and not having another. That challenge, I think, really requires active monitoring so that the jobs are available and our people have the skills to do them.
Yeah, that kind of moving at pace, George, makes me think of the Dell report that came out a few years ago, which said that 85% of the jobs that, you know, our children are going to be doing, you know, in 2030 haven't been invented yet. How, you know, does the university and, you know, education establishments, how do you keep pace, you know, with the change and making sure that we've got, you know, students that then are going to be part of the workforce that, you know, Myrtle is looking for?
Thanks, Elaine. That's a good question. And I like the way you started this discussion by taking a longer term perspective on the position of Aberdeen and its economy. So transition, of course, is something that the university is well accustomed to. We've been here for 526 years, going through a whole centuries of economic change and opportunity and problems that we've needed to deal with. And part of the way that we adjust to that is by continuing to produce graduates with high skills who are needed for the basic economic infrastructure in the city, in both the public and the private sectors. So in the public sector, that would include doctors, dentists, teachers, both primary and secondary. In the private sector, lawyers, accountants, engineers, data scientists. Regardless of how the economy changes, skilled graduates in these areas will continue to be needed. So that's partly how we address the current economic challenges, by ensuring that we're contributing to that broad economic infrastructure so the economy can then develop, taking advantage of the skills of the graduates we produce. In addition to that, though, of course, we are very focused on energy transition. That's one of our 5 priority areas in the university for the next 20 years. And just to give you a few examples of work on that topic in particular, we have the National Decommissioning Centre in Newborough, which is a joint venture with OGTC. We have our own Centre for Energy Transition, which is developing research and educational programs specifically on that topic. And we've recently launched the UK's first MSc, postgraduate taught programme in energy transition, that specifically addresses that need for the North East economy. So I think in all those ways, we're supporting the transition, focusing on energy transition in particular, while being mindful that there was a vibrant economy in the North East before oil and gas, and that will continue to be true afterwards. So we need to be diversified, both in our economy and how we support that economy with the graduates that we're developing.
Thanks, George. So Russell, that kind of sort of takes me probably to you and the kind of economy generally and the businesses that you represent, you know, in the city. Having heard what Myrtle and George have said, what do you think we need to be doing to make sure that, you know, we position ourselves to be the key driver in, you know, that energy transition?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think the first thing I'd like, contextually, it's quite important that there's every city, every place, every region, every nation is talking about net zero. And we all have a journey to make as consumers and businesses and places to get to net zero. Sometimes that's being conflated with what I would call industrial energy transition. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. That is one of the means which will enable us to achieve as a planet net zero targets. So we have huge competitive strengths in this region that can enable us to do that. And if you look at the Green Industrial Plan from the Prime Minister, points 1, 2 and 8 of that 10-point plan play hugely to our strengths: offshore wind, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage. So if you add to that, you know, our global leadership position in subsea engineering, you know, we really are well placed to lead on that. In fact, almost positioning the region as, you know, not an oil and gas capital, but actually a net exporter of net zero technologies, somewhere that can help other places to actually achieve net zero. So I think the other things that we need to do to back that up right now is we must see the delivery of the North Sea Transition Deal from UK government. I actually was on a call with Kwasi Kwarteng this week, and he assured me that they were looking to bring that forward as a matter of urgency, and with a play that he actually said that would be delivered by this summer. So I think that's absolutely vital. I think we need to do everything we can as a place to deliver the energy transition zone, which is obviously partly funded by Scottish Government. And I think we need to make sure that the work that's being done around clean energy consultations doesn't start to mitigate against oil and gas too soon. Mm-hmm. There are risks that governments de-investing in oil and gas will send out a bad message. We need to protect the industry, we need to protect the supply chain, which is struggling right now, and we need to make sure that those businesses will still be there in future to morph their business operations to actually support these new energy forms. So I think it's really important that the race to say the right things ahead of COP26 don't end up being conflated with an early death knell for the core industry. We will need oil and gas for many decades to come for energy security. It is part of the solution to net zero, not the problem, and it's really important. So I think the final point is we need, as a region, to then get our narrative straight, and we need to articulate that really clearly to the key stakeholders, to governments, that we aren't the problem, we are the solution. Europe's oil and gas capital transforming into a global leader in energy transition. And the Chamber's working with some key partners in the region with an independent television production company called Picture Zero on actually articulating that in a television documentary, which has significant interest from the BBC right now, and those discussions are ongoing. So I think there's some of the things that we need to do collectively to make sure that we don't lose the advantage that we have right now.
Thanks, Russell. I suppose Steve Russell there talked a bit more about the kind of the national and then the regional, and he mentioned the energy transition zone. Obviously, kind of at a local level, it then comes down to the council. And I know the economic performance report that was published in November highlights that need, just as Myrtle said, that we need to be, seeing that energy transition, at pace. Can you talk a little bit about what the council, as I say, Russell mentioned energy transition zone, but what the council's kind of going to be doing in terms of the transition, both I suppose in renewables, the other low carbon economic sectors, and I think the third one from the report was obviously the net zero through greener travel. But just maybe talk a little bit about where the council fits in.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of heard from the speakers so far how complex an environment this is, and for the council, that's obviously layered from an institutional perspective. So the fleet that we have, the buildings that we have 22,000 council houses, for example, but there's the wider kind of city resilience piece, I think, around how we transition into, I think as Russell kind of sort of said, the new energy capital of Europe. So the council obviously is looking at how we can play a role in that, both from leading and delivering, so specifically around our infrastructure, but more importantly, how do we provide the necessary levers for the private sector to be able to then make that transition. And so a key piece for that was the energy transition zone, which we've now kind of got into the local development plan, which is going through due process. And for us, that was a key indicator to the local economy that we are serious about engaging and making sure that we work with the energy sector to see how we can kind of make that transition. So there is a kind of journey that the council is obviously now starting to embark upon, which is looking at how over the next 30, 40 years, we can go from an organisation into a net zero position, but also from the council's perspective, we have a city role to play. So understanding what our role in that would be to help that transition materialise. So for me, there's a kind of number of areas where we need to kind of work with others. So as we work through the renewable energy sources with the energy sector, understanding the city economy and how we move that to a low carbon economic environment, I suppose is probably the word, and how we kind of then start that transformation of the city itself to kind of getting into that greener travel, enhanced energy efficiency and provision of the kind of accessible and connected green space that we'll need. So that's going to include looking at how we provide or invest in transportation going forward. So what would the council's role? So whether it's, I think people have hopefully seen the hydrogen buses that the council's kind of led on. Now that isn't just as straightforward as just buying a hydrogen bus. We've got to obviously put the infrastructure in that sits behind that. And I know that my colleague in economic development, Richard Sweetenham, has been kind of the lead here in the sort of development of the hydrogen technology that we've really started to kind of upscale in. And we have refueling units, two refueling units now, I think, in the city. So again, it's starting to build that kind of infrastructure. And I think for me, part of the council's role in all of this will be, because it's an emerging technology sector, the council, with the infrastructure and asset base that it has, can obviously start providing a bit of comfort around how we would potentially absorb some of or provide some of the demand for that energy source. And so that kind of gives hopefully a confidence into the private sector for them to then start saying, well, actually, if we know we've got a demand there, there's a lower risk to enter into that supply chain. and provide that supply. And so again, it's just trying to work with the two in tandem to see how we kind of start moving them all forward together. And to be fair, I think it's the first step on a very long journey. And the biggest challenge obviously will be what will be the new energy source, how will that be manufactured, produced, and actually end up in people's homes, or end up in businesses, business premises, factories, etc. And I think we're really well placed in the northeast with the wealth of talent that we have, both from George's side, the university graduates that we've got coming through, but then you look at the sort of the knowledge base and the technical skills that we have in the northeast through the oil and gas sector. I think we're really well placed to kind of make that step forward into to the next stage of delivering against all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Just before I kind of take the discussion a little bit wider, is anybody, Russell, George, or Butcher, do you want to kind of pick up on any of the comments from the other speakers there before, as I say, we'll kind of move on to the slightly wider economic challenges? Russell, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think one thing we've talked a little bit about skills, but we need to talk more about skills. But I think it's not just the skills themselves; it's the messaging around that. You know, we need to make sure that the support is there to retrain our existing workforce, because there will be similarities and differences in terms of what's required. So it's really important that we are collectively pushing government and other agencies to make sure that we can actually upskill. But I think even perhaps more important is, what about the next generation? If the next generation sees coming into this space as joining a dirty, polluting oil and gas sector, it's not going to be attractive. So it's really important that the messaging that we talked about is, if you come into this space now, you will be part of the solution to achieving net zero. You can make a difference in your life and in your career if you come into this space. I'm not sure we're telling that story well enough yet. So I think that's really something that we need to do better.
Mm-hmm.
Just, Elaine, if I can just jump in, a question from it is coming through the Q&A, and to pick up on that point that Russell was making. I mean, do we feel, or do our panelists feel, that we're maximising the opportunities to create a kind of centre of excellence in all of this, that we can then not only deploy in the local market, but we actually can export again in the same way that we are in the traditional oil and gas market? I don't know whether, George, is that one for you?
I think it's really important that we collaborate closely as a group of organisations in the Northeast to bring investment from government in the first instance, to prime all of this, to make sure we're properly set up to be a genuine European capital for energy transition. And I say that not least because, as Russell has hinted earlier, there are lots of other parts of the UK and indeed places across the world that are competing for this space. So I think the collaboration is really important, and that we work together as a single group of organisations across public and private sector, the universities, Opportunity Northeast, to bring that investment to the Northeast. And we're certainly capable of doing that if we continue to work in the way that we have been.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, as we've kind of touched on sort of before, and made the point that we're, you know, Aberdeen is more than just about energy. So there's all the other parts that, you know, George said, that, you know, the university is making sure that we're still producing and training people in all the different parts. And I would say you can never have too many lawyers. But I suppose, you know, again, kind of Steve, we've seen through the City Region deal with kind of recent investment, you know, 21 million in the seed pod, you know, for the food and drink industry, which is going to be a centre of excellence, you know, for manufacturing and kind of production. In terms of the you know, the wider economy in the city, what you know, has the council been doing to try and, you know, kind of stimulate, you know, grow again, you know, post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's, I suppose, the biggest challenge we're all facing is what does post-pandemic kind of start to look like and feel like, and how will I suppose social behaviour change through all of that, whether that be utilising the city centre, whether it's utilising office space, etc. So yeah, it is going to be one of the big challenges going forward in terms of that business stimulation, and obviously within the council, we would have a normal kind of process where we engage economically with businesses, etc. But there's obviously a piece, I think, around during the kind of pandemic. So, for example, we had the construction industry, which was very much kind of closed, and we were able to kind of help that industry from the council's perspective by accelerating some of our work streams that we were doing around our council house build program, for example. So, you know, we've kind of now got to a place where we were able to kind of support those industries whilst we were going through that pandemic with work streams, which probably would have only been kicking off later on this year. But it gave them that kind of cash flow ability whilst we were going through the pandemic and the lockdowns that we had. So I think there is a lot that the council can do in terms of that supply chain. We obviously have, you know, the realms of about £1 billion a year turnover in total. So very much making sure that we were trying to support businesses. So where we would normally have, say, 28-day payment terms, we reduced that down to effectively trying to pay all businesses within a 7-day period, so we can get the cash out the door, get it into their bank accounts, and try and support them from a cash flow perspective. In terms of going forward, I mean, you know, we've already kind of touched on the kind of net zero route map that we want to set out, and how the council will move to that. Again, looking at how we then engage with the supply chains around all of that, which will be huge investment programs that we will have coming forward around, for example, all our housing stock. You know, we spend 20-25 million plus a year on our housing stock. So again, trying to engage with those sectors to see how we can kind of stimulate those business areas going forward. But obviously trying to move into the new technology, and there's the challenges, you know, the traditional, you know, boiler replacements, for example, compared to what would a future technology look like. So it kind of links back to what we've already been talking about in terms of that green technology, and working with those businesses so that they can start morphing into that kind of space to understand what, I suppose, the demand I kind of talked about earlier that we will provide to the private sector, so they can then give us that supply chain. So for me, there's quite a bit of thinking to be done around how we engage with that supply chain and local businesses, and how we kind of try and engage with them to see how we kind of move forward in a very different world coming forward. And then the council obviously has a wider economic role within the kind of local area. So again, and we'll maybe come on to this later, but around the sort of city centre, how do we kind of start working with businesses around that? How do we start, how will people react when hopefully one day we get out of the lockdown and we're allowed to move freely again? But how do we start moving people around the city? They might want to move around differently. Will people want to use public transport? How do you give people the confidence to move back into using public transport, confined spaces and sort of physical distancing and everything? So again, this is all the kind of challenges that we're going to have to start working through to understand how we think as a local authority that we can effectively support the economy from that perspective. So it is going to be quite a challenge, I think, for us to kind of start seeing the kind of investment routes that we'll need to kind of work through. But I think the local development plan for us starts to set out that kind of wider ambition of how the city might look and feel in the next sort of 20, 30 years. And that's the thing now, is trying to look into that future and see the positives that we can take out of the situation that we're in, because I think we're at the cusp of some massive global opportunities within Aberdeen, just because of the nature of the economy here, and making sure that the council puts in the right levers and provides the right policies that actually supports the economy, rather than, you know, we wouldn't be the natural leaders in these types of areas. You know, we have the levers to be able to kind of help facilitate that move. So I think that's the kind of wider picture that I would see us as playing as we go forward, as well as the more traditional kind of economic support that you would expect around employment and you know, the kind of kickstart programs and these kind of things that we would be doing by normal course of events. I think we need to move into that much more challenging space of how the city might look in 20 years.
Yeah, I know the man that can put you in touch with all businesses. Russell, I know you've been working hard, obviously, with all the various businesses in Aberdeen and the challenges you know, that they've faced. You know, what have been the key ones, and what do you think we need to be doing, you know, to help us back onto the road to recovery?
Well, I think, first of all, the question that you posed us is, what do we need to do to reopen the local economy?
Yeah.
Well, the answer is reopen the local economy. For those of you that haven't seen the statement that the Chamber made yesterday on behalf of our membership, it's on the news section of our website. Please do take a look and share it with your networks if you believe it reflects what your thoughts are. I'm not going to repeat it at this point, but I think what I would say is when we do start to reopen, and there was a hint of this in what the First Minister said yesterday, which was probably the only good bit of what we heard, was that there was a sense that there was going to be a transition for businesses that were coming out of mothball, that were reopening, and actually it was probably going to be a more dangerous time economically for those companies as they start to operate again, without business being restored to previous levels, without a pipeline in place, and with cash levels depleted. Actually, it's probably a more dangerous time than being closed. So government needs to understand the pressures that those companies will be under. We need to have appropriate support schemes that are tapered and phased to accept that reality. And it's really important that government and other institutions do not make the same mistakes that we made coming out of the 2008 financial crisis. It's really, really important that businesses are supported, that viable companies are helped through the period, and that we certainly don't see big demands for recalling CBILS loans and cliff edges in support, because viable businesses will then fall off the edge. They're clinging on by their fingertips today. That will be what knocks them over the edge, and we will then lose businesses and livelihoods as a result of that. I think that we need to avoid self-fulfilling prophecies. Steve talks about how do we come back in this. There have been lots of the office is dead, people will never go to live events again, and the more often we hear these things, there's a danger that they will actually just become true. So I think we need to push back on some of that stuff, learn lessons from the last 12 months, absolutely. Assume that everything that happened before March 2020 was really bad, absolutely not. So I think we need to fuse those learnings as we come out of the period. Trust between government and business is stretched and strained and needs to be restored, because this needs to be a collaborative and collective effort to try and rebuild the economy. It will be driven by the private sector, not by government. And I think the final thing that we need to do regionally is, we do have a very international outlook. We have a very global population here, and one of the real risks that we see is that with the airline industry in turmoil, that we end up being disenfranchised from the key cities, the key hubs and the key routes that we need to be connected to maintain our economy, to grow our economy, to realise our economic ambitions. We cannot become a cut-off northern outpost that you simply can't get to. So I think engaging with the Union Connectivity Review, supporting Aberdeen International Airport, working collectively as a region to make sure that we retain and grow our connectivity is one of the big challenges that I think we have as we come out of this.
Thanks. Thanks, Russell. And Myrtle, the OGTC is also a member organisation. So, is that similar in terms of the challenges that your members, have been facing, the challenges and opportunities, that you face in the kind of short to medium term?
Yes, so thank you. So the our members are made up of technology developers, normally very small, maybe one or two technologies. We've got entrepreneurs who are got very nascent business, and then of course we have some of the larger, what we call operators here in Aberdeen, and of course last year was unenviable in that we had the price crash, and we had COVID, and then obviously we had the real concerns about, and we were going to diversify, and we were moving from an ambition to action over this period, and how do we maintain that? So if I just talk about the very small developers, I mean, what we really saw was a narrowing of the opportunity to deploy their technology, because they rely on activity to do that. Someone has to work over a well or have a shutdown. And of course, a lot of those programs were compressed last year. because you just couldn't get the people offshore, and we had to really focus on delivery of gas, obviously, for the winter. So lots of projects were pushed, and we've obviously tried our best to support our developers. But what we will say is that we've had excellent support from those who've invested in those technologies. So even when things have been delayed, we haven't seen as many cancellations unless it's a genuine, we can't do it anymore because that opportunity's gone. Mm-hmm. So lots of things have been moved into this year and next year, and we're really working with our members to really keep that as something that it will happen. I think when I look at the operators, I think that, you know, their focus has been obviously on the health of their people and safety, and obviously how they keep their facilities safe during this period. So actually, it's not actually been quite a shutdown of activities, being more focused. So focused on things that are going to help us on efficiency, on asset integrity, and just keeping the safety. What I will say is that on the area, though, of the energy transition, if anything, I've seen the companies have doubled down to say, actually, this has been such a wake-up call, and for those who weren't awake. But basically, they've come out with very aggressive plans towards, especially emissions reduction, especially on the back of the North Sea transition deal. So I see that. I see them looking at projects which, you know, even a year ago would have been, well, this doesn't meet what we would expect from an investment perspective. Looking at this because of the real focus on transition. So I think a lot of what I would call, you know, how does this business work now? What about the new decisions we need to make to some effect, because there's new economic concerns. And then maybe the last thing has been the financing. So the financing for some of these technologies still remains challenging. It has not been at all, but it does remain challenging. And where a company might have supported something which they had somewhat of an interest in, that doesn't really happen now. Really focused interest, which isn't really necessarily a bad thing, because then you're more likely to get deployment. But everything has become quite focused, with efficiency still remaining key, and a doubling down of, we also need to get on with the transition.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Myrtle, obviously you kind of talked about, you know, how does it work now? George, I've just given my first online lecture in the energy elective, and then done my first online tutorial. So I know from the challenges that I faced with that, you know, university life has changed, you know, kind of considerably. How's the university and the students been coping? And do you think we're going to be, you know, moving and working that way, you know, for a time being, or are you keen to get back as far as possible, you know, to what we were kind of pre-2020?
Thanks, Elaine, and thanks for contributing to the quality of higher education that we're providing. That's really very helpful. I think, again, I'll take a slightly wider context on this, which is that the university has faced many of the same challenges as other organisations in the economy in the last 12 months. Around 30% of our funding comes from the Scottish Government, and that's been secure, and we're grateful that it's continued and in some respects has improved. But the rest of our revenue, we win competitively in the marketplace for students and in the marketplace for research funding, or by providing commercial services such as halls of residence and catering and conferences and events. So our first challenge is to get back to the growth path that we were on before COVID came along. And I think this strikes very nicely with Russell's comments about getting the economy open and getting the UK open, because we are quite heavily reliant on recruitment of students from outside the UK. Yeah. And we need those students to be able to get here. Of course, for it to be a safe context for them. That matters for us and for our education, which, as you rightly say, much of which has switched online in the last 12 months. And I think some of that will continue into the future. But we see really strong demand from Scottish, UK, European and global students for an on-campus experience. That's the type of education that they really want from us. And the demand is high, and we need to get the circumstances right for the students to come back to us in that way. Many of them have not been able to get to Aberdeen at all this year, and they've studied only online. And we want some confidence and optimism that by the autumn, our students will be able to come back to us in the normal way. Now that matters not only for the university. Our foundational purpose, I've mentioned the 526 years already, but in 1495, we were set up to be open to all and dedicated to the pursuit of truth in the service of others. And that service starts right here in Aberdeen and in the Northeast, and includes, of course, service to the economy. And the connection to our student recruitment is simply this, that provides jobs, employment for the people around us. Not only do the students come and pay fees, but they rent accommodation, they spend money in the shops, they spend money in the restaurants. So all of this is enormously important for the Northeast economy, that we get our business, we're not a business of course, we're a charity as a university, get that up and running properly again, so we're able to provide the education, undertake the research and deliver those benefits to the Northeast economy. We need to be open.
Yeah, Russell, you and I have spoken, in the past about the knowledge economy, and the success of the cities going forward are going to be the ones that have got, the successful universities and are attracting, and retaining the students.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important part of any successful city DNA is having that, and I think we'll probably touch a little bit more on that when we come to talk about the city centre as well. But yeah, Elena, I think that's an often missed but really vital point, that if we're going to be a successful place, then we need to be attractive to those young people to come here to study, and hopefully not just to study, but to actually fall in love with the place and to decide this is where they'd like to build careers and families and lives.
Yeah.
So it's Nick here. I'll jump in if I can. There's a question on the Q&A bar there, and I guess put it in the context of us trying to recover from last year's events, and we plot our path forward. Maybe more directed at Myrtle, George, and Russell than Steve. But if there was one ask of government that you could ask, what would it be? I don't know who wants to go first.
I think you should ask Steve that too.
Do you want me to go first?
Russell, you go first.
I think the question I want to pose is, why can't government trust business? Businesses across the UK have spent many millions of pounds making their premises secure for their staff, for their customers, yet they are viewed seemingly by the people making decisions as being the cause of the spread of this virus, not part of the solution to combating it. So please trust business as part of the solution as we come out of this, to accelerate that process, please.
Myrtle?
Yeah, so I was thinking very deeply on that. So I think for myself, if all that's been said, I think, on COVID, but one of the things I see about us getting this green recovery going is the areas where the government can most help with regulatory framework and making things a lot quicker. So I think if we could have something which is more predictable and quicker, some of this private investment which is waiting to invest but needs more assurance and speed about when and how things happen would be transformational. So many people I speak to about projects that they'd like to do or the investment that they'd like to make don't actually know how this will become real, because there are things that need to be done which have never been done before, and not just sectors but regulatory bodies that need to work together that don't naturally work together at the moment. So I would really hope that we could work at pace on that, not slowly but at pace, like a project, a very fast project, to really outline these pathways a bit more clearly.
George?
So I have one ask of government, but in a sense it's in two parts, and that's to maintain the commitments that they've already made to enhance the percentage of GDP which is devoted to research and innovation. And this is not, of course, only for the university, but for all the innovation that takes place in the economy. And secondly, the UK government has committed to increasing the number of international students in the UK from 440,000 to 600,000. And for all the reasons and the benefits I've just explained, I would ask government to get the conditions right for keeping that commitment and to attract those students to come to us.
Okay. Go on then, Steve. Elaine's not going to let you off.
Given I work in a political environment, I think my one ask of government would be to please listen to the three speakers that have just provided a response.
Good answer.
Nicely done.
we've talked, I think everybody's mentioned that, you know, collaboration and working together, and a big part of this, you know, kind of webinar is having so many businesses and you know, and a wide audience, so that we can start to look at how we can work together. And George, you mentioned obviously the research that the university does, and I know a lot of that is with you know, with businesses. You know, what kind of connections are you looking for, you know, between town and gown, as you know, going forward, and opportunities that businesses have to work with you?
Thank you. You're right. We have a long history of town and gown connections. That needs to go way beyond the ceremonial parts of that relationship into deep economic connections. I've mentioned some of the work that we're doing already with the National Decommissioning Centre. In addition to that, we're working very closely with Opportunity Northeast on a range of its projects, including the BioHub in Forester Hill, which I think will give a tremendous boost to our life sciences sector in the Northeast. There's quite a small share of employment in the Northeast from life sciences at present, and we have the potential to push that on. In addition, of course, beyond the research and innovation side of things, we provide short courses, upskilling courses. We've had tremendous demand for the upskilling courses that we provide, supported by funding from the Scottish Government. It's running something like 8 to 1. We have, for the number of places we have, we're massively oversubscribed. And you were asking, or Nick was just a few minutes ago, what are the asks of government? So I'm going to ask for a third one, which is please provide more resources for the upskilling courses, because the demand is certainly there, and our capacity to meet them at the moment cannot be achieved, because we simply don't have the funding available from the Scottish Government to support that. So I think upskilling, the new BioHub activity, the effort that's going on to develop food and nutrition in the Northeast, all of this is really important to us, and we're well connected to it. In addition to that, and just one final thing, we've introduced a special scholarship for postgraduate students who are resident in the Northeast, which gives a 20% discount on our postgraduate programs. So that reflects the priority we're giving to potential students in this area, and we're really trying to help by making our programs more accessible in that way.
That's great. Myrtle, I know that OGTC obviously also works together, you know, industry and local and national government and academia. I suppose, what are your specific requests, and how do you want to see us working closer together to help you achieve your specific goals? You're going to pop on your mic.
Apologies, I thought we'd be able to go through the whole thing without that. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so for me, you know, OGTC was formed based on partnership, and George has talked about some of the partnership that's ongoing. We have actually created some new alliances and partnerships, because we think we really do need to reach out. So, you know, I talked about the partnership we have with the Offshore Renewables Energy Catapult, and that's really led to some nascent projects which hopefully will grow into a business. So we're looking at wind turbine decommissioning is a big issue with the NDC. So, you know, we're really trying to reach across and make sure that we are both doing the assessment and trying to retain the skill sets here. Another area that we've looked at, which I think is very important, is to remember that to some extent we are re-engineering a lot of the systems that we're doing from end to end. So one of the other things that we've done is we've linked up with quite a few of the catapults to look at end-to-end for hydrogen, looking at the generation, transmission and storage, but also what's happening with the customer. And I think it's very important for us to do that, because then you have to be, that whole system needs to work for any of our ambitions to be achieved. And there are other places that we've reached out to, just so that the money from government can be leveraged even more so. So we're going to be starting a project shortly with UKRI and the defence sector, looking at subsea autonomous systems. It's been delayed really because of COVID, but we can't delay it any longer. So we're going to move ahead. And then I think the other area that we're looking at in terms of collaboration is how do we get projects going where, you know, more than one entity or person really needs to be part of that decision making. So we've been involved in things like Orion and some of the other energy hub projects, which was spearheaded by the OGA. But also what we've been doing is working with our technology developers to see how we can get technology stacks. So they have maybe technology, but how can we pull them together to actually make a solution? So for example, we've had a recent project called Renewable Subsea Power Systems, which is a combination of 5 people's technology to make actually one solution which might be used. So again, what we're doing is we're reaching out, and we're doing more work on the reaching out to make sure that we have sufficient fundamental research going in, because when you see some of the changes that are needed in the technology space, it definitely sits in the innovation in terms of the thinking and the science.
Yeah. And Russell, I know you spend a lot of time pulling businesses, kind of together, and, Vanguard project was looking at, it looks at innovative ways to address, some of the economic challenges. What kind of projects do you see coming through the pipeline, and how the businesses can work together?
The first thing I'd probably say in response to that, Elaine, is that this region's actually viewed with some envy, certainly across Scotland and probably more widely, as having a really, really strong partnership between business, between education, between government, between public sector. So I think we should kind of celebrate that and note that, without thinking that we're the finished article, because we're not, and we must do better. And if we're going to succeed here, we need to do even better. But the starting position is quite good. We do have a sense that those partners need to trust each other. They need to delegate. They need to work cohesively, because there's a lot to do. And if we're tripping over each other, then we're going to be less effective in terms of delivering the stuff we need to do. So I think that would be my ask on that. A regional economic strategy, and I've dealt with a lot of these things from my time in the north of England, is as strong and believable as any that I've seen. It was already delivering. We need to not lose focus on it. It's called a strategy for a reason, and it needs not to be derailed by what's happened in the last 12 months. Our core strengths, our core sectors, the things that we need to focus on to deliver long-term prosperity here have not changed. So we need to get back to that. We need to make sure that we have oven-ready ideas and projects that are ready to press play, because it's going to, as a few speakers have said, this is going to be a highly competitive race away from the line when we actually get the green light to get moving again, and we need to be at the front of that queue. It's not just about Opportunity Northeast and chambers and councils and universities, it's about everybody in the region. Everyone has a role to play, even if it's just about talking up the place, using the absolutely.com materials, starting to actually focus on the positives, not the negatives. Everybody said, oh, Aberdeen has been dreadfully hit by COVID. Well, where hasn't? We're not behind or ahead on this. We need to absolutely reflect that this is something which is affecting the world. Previous oil and gas downturns have been local, I accept. This is different. So, let's not feel sorry for ourselves. Let's get on the front foot and be ready to go. We need to help ourselves through local procurement, and something that the Chamber did last June was we actually published a website called northeastnow.scot. If you haven't seen it, please do have a look at that. It's effectively a collection of data and information about how you can shop local, buy local, choose local produce when you're in doing your supermarket shop. And we need to start actually moving that more into a business-to-business context and challenging our businesses and our business leaders. Have you done all you can to engage local suppliers in your supply chain? And we've had some examples recently where we've been high-profile projects where I don't think that is true. So we absolutely all have a responsibility to say, are we doing all we can to put our investment, our business cost spent back through companies that are employing people in this region? So I think they're the main things that I would highlight under the sort of partnership. But everyone has a role to play in this.
Yeah. And Steve, obviously you kind of talked before about the council using, I suppose, almost your sheer scale, to try and provide that opportunities that, you talked about, and providing the confidence to the private sector. that you're kind of leading. So there are lots of opportunities for the council to be involved in that collaborative approach, I presume.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that the council would naturally operate would be through just for the very nature of that we touch everybody's life, we touch every business. It's kind of a bit of our ethos about working together and that collaboration. I think moving forward, though, I think it's I think the position for the city is that it needs to start, as Russell kind of said, start talking itself up. It is a fantastic city. You can't deny that Aberdeen is a fantastic place to live and work. You look at the offering that you have within the kind of city. And from the council's perspective, we've been working closely with, for example, the Harbour Board in the development of the new harbour. We're working with, the various bodies and sectors that operate within the city around how we can kind of help contribute towards all of that. Within our kind of public sector world, and George will know this, we come together as NHS, police, fire, the universities, councils, etc. So all the public sector bodies come together and looking to see how we can harness the kind of joint collective to deliver better for Aberdeen. And so if we take, for example, at the moment within the Queen Street, we've been working with the university, we've been working with Police Scotland, we've been working with NHS Grampian, we've been working to some extent with the private sector about how we start to pull all of that together, and how we start to kind of sort of say, well, actually, there's a potential here for reinventing this part of the city centre. So that's required quite complex collaboration and working together, because it's completely different reporting systems and governance systems that you have to kind of step into. And collectively, we've managed to navigate ourselves through that to get to a place where, we have Police Scotland moving out of their Queen Street headquarters into Marshall, as well as Woodhill House. So again, we're working with our neighbouring authority. So for me, it's just about trying to identify those opportunities for collaboration and getting all the right people around the table, but having the right mindset that actually collectively we can pull something off that will be quite unique to the Northeast, quite unique to Aberdeen, and continue to enhance what I think is one of the best places in the world to live. And I've lived in many countries in the world in my time. And so for me, I think the opportunities now of us all kind of coming together, we all have now a collective understanding of we're coming out of the pandemic. And I think I absolutely 100% agree with Russell on this one. We have to be first off the block. We have to be the ones that everybody's chasing. And I think with the skill sets that you have in the Northeast, we absolutely should be the Usain Bolt and not the Steve Whyte in the 100 metres, I have to say. So.
And that's quite nicely kind of Steve taking us from sort of the kind of wider and the energy transition and the local economy, but then to focus on Aberdeen and the city centre, and what it is. And as I know, the council are just about to embark on the city centre master plan and the beach and the harbour regeneration, which again you kind of touched on. That's obviously a great opportunity for collaboration. Can you maybe just explain a little bit about the process as you see what's going to kind of unfold going forward?
Yeah, so we've made a commitment to refresh, and I think we're calling it a refresh, but actually for me it's about reinventing the beach, the city centre, the kind of West End, the kind of harbour area, the city centre harbour area, how you kind of look at all of that and how we kind of reinvent ourselves and make sure we're first off the starting line. I mean, I truly believe that has to be owned by probably everybody listening to this webinar. It needs to be owned and influenced by the people that will ultimately either create a business or have a business in those areas, wants to have a business in those areas, wants to go in and use those businesses. It can't be, the council kind of saying, here's a map and this is what we think should happen. That's just completely wrong. It has to be completely and utterly owned by the people of Aberdeen, and the council, as the custodians of the infrastructure of the city on behalf of those people, can then look at how we can then help deliver that vision and how we can help deliver that reinvention of a city centre. We all know that every city centre currently, not just in Scotland or the UK, but across the globe, are probably starting to think, well, what will a city centre look like post 2020 pandemic outbreak? So for me, it's about trying to harness the skill sets and to understand that vision that the entrepreneurs in the city will have, and how can the council pull the right levers, whether that be going back to government and asking for government help or assistance, or asking for government to provide us with the necessary powers. We will have our own levers that we can use, so whether that's around planning policy, whether that's around Section 75 consents, or whether it's about the council's legal ability to CPO sites to be able to redevelop. So there's a lot of non-financial levers I think the council can bring to the table to help those people deliver that city centre beach regeneration, reinvention. In fact, I think I'd like to call it reinvention rather than regeneration. It sounds like it's run down. It wasn't run down in February last year. It definitely needed a new coat of paint and everything, but now we clearly see, as you walk around the city centre, I live in the city centre, you can see the number of small units that are now starting to just, they're empty. So we kind of start with a blank canvas to some extent as well. So it's not that you have a crowded full economy and business within the city centre, which makes it very difficult to then start maybe changing how it might look. So we kind of have that blank canvas to start from as well. I think there's also the other, the financial, what would be the financial ask of the council, and what would the council's role be in terms of moving that forward to deliver the city's vision of what that should look like, and not just it's just a council driven or council led process. Absolutely, we will have all the statutory advice that we would give and support around all of that, but for me it absolutely has to be owned by the people of Aberdeen. It can't be owned by anybody else. It's only us that can make this city a place where everybody's going to want to come and visit and spend the weekend. If we start looking at what we can offer as a city, as the kind of foundations of that, you've got Tekka, so you've got, a wonderful, if we ever get back to concerts and stuff like that. So the attractions of bringing people back into the city, the art gallery, the Union Terrace Gardens is really starting to come out of the ground now. And if you walk around, you can start to see that. Provoskeen's house. And so we're starting to put all of those things in to try and attract people. And we need to kind of reinvent the city centre to be able to sort of say to people that when they come here, I'm going to come back. I need to come back because there's so much more to do and see in this city. So for me, it's about all of that kind of levers, but it's very much got to be driven and owned by the people of Aberdeen.
And Russell, you and I have spoken a fair bit about cities and trying to encourage people kind of back into city centres. What's the chamber kind of doing in that regard?
First of all, just to respond, I mean, we've already had a number of discussions with the City Council and other partners, really supportive of the refreshed master plan, some interesting feedback and opportunities arising. Elaine, you mentioned the Vanguard initiative. We have a new group of project volunteers at the moment looking at a series of interventions which actually they were already working on before the announcement that there may be a refreshed master plan, and some really interesting opportunities to work together there. But Steve's point's right. It's in any successful city, it's the role of the local authorities, the enterprise agencies to be the stimulus for change, not to fund it all, not to create it. So we need the City Council to provide the leadership that we had previously on the master plan, to lay out the vision, to demonstrate themselves that they're behind this, but it's then up to the private sector to come in and pick up the slack. That's what happens in successful cities. So that's the first thing. I think there's been a sense recently that we're talking about the potential acceleration of the demise of bricks and mortar retail, and there's a glib line that's being used. Well, it's okay, we'll just replace the shops with living space, and that demonstrates a real lack of understanding, I think, of how the ecosystems of cities work. If we're going to be places that people want to live, work, visit, and spend leisure time, we need to have retail. We need to have culture, we need hospitality, we need residential, we need vibrant office communities. And if any one of those elements is out of sync, then the whole ecosystem starts to fall apart. So we have to, it's not okay to say that one of those things isn't important, because if without any of them working together, you will not be a successful city. So I think that's very clear. And there has been some worrying mood music from Scottish Government, which is almost starting to shift the policy focus away from cities. And every time we try and raise cities and city recovery with government, the stock response that you get is, yes, we're investing in 20-minute neighbourhoods. That's different. And that's not to say that 20-minute neighbourhoods and rural agendas are not important, but not at the expense of our cities.
Yeah.
And I guess rather than just talking about that, actually trying to do something about it, these concerns are also shared by my counterparts in Edinburgh and Glasgow chambers. And we've actually been speaking with Elaine from Brodie's, and with Professor Brian Evans from the Glasgow Urban Lab, who previously published something called the Urban Age Study, AGE being an acronym for Aberdeen, Glasgow and Edinburgh. And the premise of the report was that 80% of Scotland's future economic growth would be driven by the three city regions of Aberdeen, Glasgow and Edinburgh. And it laid out a number of recommendations and suggestions to government of how that could be supported. The concern right now is that that's perhaps falling on deaf ears. So we are currently proposing to publish Urban Age 2, which will be about the place of cities in economic recovery from COVID, what's changed, what hasn't, how important are they, the fact they can't simply be replaced by 20-minute neighbourhoods and these phrases, that yes, we need to deliver low emission zones and other things, but we can't just simply keep people out of cities as a way of achieving targets. So all of these things will be picked up within this report that we hope, if everything goes to plan, will give us some pre-election headlines, assuming indeed there is a Holyrood election in May, and will then deliver the full report and recommendations in the summer. And hopefully you will all be invited back to listen to the outcomes and the outputs of that piece of work.
I think the point that you made there is a valid one about the ecosystem, because speaking to in house building, obviously where I've got kind of particular interest, there is a suggestion that we're moving to just everything that's brownfield, it's going to be brownfield development, and effectively take away all the other things. You're no longer going to have the kind of the business, the industry, because it's all going to be housing in the city centre. But that can't happen. You do need all of those parts. Everything that is a vacant shop can't become a residential dwelling. We need to stimulate it kind of all. I suppose at Myrtle, looking at it from your point of view, you've got to try and attract the skilled workforce to Aberdeen, and as we've said and Russell said, everybody is trying to kind of, it's that race to energy transition and the race out of to improve the economy. What do you think we need in the city centre? So in terms of participating in the city centre master plan, what do you think we should have?
So Elaine, I did ask my son what would he like.
Yeah.
He's 21 and he's young, and he said, look, he's happy to live somewhere, but he's got to have really fast broadband. And from that, I think what he's really alluding to is that we need to have a very strong digital ecosystem. So I think that's really, because then you can live here, you can work here, but you can work from anywhere else as well, because you've got that connection. But what I think is that, especially if we've got temporary places, I would really love to see our entrepreneurs fill a much bigger space in terms of the shop front, in terms of what they're doing. Some of the absolute fantastic stuff they're doing, I think, would be inspiring for the general public, for our young people, etc. And I was very lucky to go to see Microsoft's offices in Seattle, their campus, and they have a shop front there, and it was absolutely amazing. It's like being in a modern museum, but things are actually happening now, and you've got the experts there to talk to you about it. So what I think I'd like to see is, amongst all the other things that are happening, that we showcase a lot more and not have this distance between ourselves and communities as to what we're doing and how exciting it is.
Yeah, Russell, you want to showcase something?
Yeah, I guess it's another example of how we all potentially have a role to play. I'm not sure how many people on the call today actually have premises in Aberdeen city centre, but a really strong element of our offer over the last 10 years has been the work that's been delivered by our business improvement district, Aberdeen Inspired. Mm-hmm. And despite our best attempts, We haven't been able to secure an extension to the current 5-year period, so we will have. So the Aberdeen Inspired has to go back to its electorate in May, June, to actually ask for a third term. Desperately poor timing, in the sense that, you know, people can't occupy those premises. They're potentially paying rates or rent on places that they can't occupy. So why would they want to authorise a, albeit small, levy on top of that at a time when cash is tight? Aberdeen Inspired has been demonstrated it's one of the best in Europe. It's won the award of the best in Europe. It has delivered many things, including new art, which is just stunning and makes me so proud to be from here and show people around. If we lose Aberdeen Inspired this summer, it will be a huge blow to our plans to move the city centre forward. So anyone that has any influence in that debate, please make sure you either vote positively or tell someone else that does have a vote to vote positively, because we need all of those types of organisations to be firing on all cylinders if we're going to come out this way we want to be.
Yeah, that's right, Russell. And again, it's one of the voices representing, you know, 900 levy payers. Aberdeen Inspired will be a key part, you know, of Steve's city centre, you know, master plan, and being able to channel what the businesses want to see. George,
just to jump in and just answer your question, Russell. If you look at the Q&A section, then there are quite a few people with premises in the city centre, and also quite a number of people with a particular desire to hear what plans we have for Union Street. But one of the questions, I guess, and maybe it's one for Steve first to pick up, was, you know, does the emergence from, you know, some of the challenges, of course, is about being brave and courageous in terms of decision making you have, and does an emergence from a pandemic create the opportunity for people to be brave and courageous with the decisions that they're going to make and the plans they're going to set?
I mean, I think so for me, I think the pandemic gives you that platform and opportunity to think differently, to act differently, and to design differently. So I think there is a real clear opportunity now for people to be able to engage in that process and to help shape what the city centre might look like. And it's the dynamics of Aberdeen that we need to sort of think about going forward as well. You know, we have a healthy, I think it's about 40,000 students, for example. So what does a city centre look like from that student base? So, you know, George talking about trying to encourage the growth in students. Well, we need to understand from a university perspective, what does a student city centre look like, and how do you then layer that on with the graduate program that you then have? So what does, you know, where do people want to work? How will people want to work? Is it in the city centre? And if you're going to work in the city centre, do you want to live in the city centre? And if you want to live in the city centre, what facilities will you need to make that an enjoyable experience? So for me, I think this is the real springboard into a completely new world. And we have, as I said, you know, a kind of blank canvas to start thinking about how we can shape that. And we need to, again, you know, come back to the pace of this. We are going to have to move at pace, because there will be other places that they'll already be ready to launch themselves. So we need to kind of really move quickly over the next few months around that. Obviously, as we've gone into the pandemic, we've obviously been given advice from government around the pandemic and the implications of that. And one of the clear early indicators around all of that was around I think it was originally called social distancing, and then it became physical distancing. And there was a conversation around, if we were starting to come out of the lockdown and were to allow things to open, can we actually allow things to open if we expect people to be 2 meters apart? And that's really what then triggered the whole, I suppose, the interventions that we've put in from a public health perspective to try and ensure that as businesses started to open, that we would have space so people could physically distance. And be able to come in and effectively, to some extent, this is trying to support businesses reopening. And I think it'll become even more critical going forward, because I think it will be, you know, I'm no psychologist, but, you know, I just know for myself when I'm out and about, you deliberately try to keep a 2 meter distance from other people. And so you need that space to be able to do that? And how long will it be before people forget about the pandemic, forget about what it was like, forget about face masks and the physical distancing aspects and everything? But I think there's also a kind of future proofing of anything that you do in the city centre. So we already are hearing around, you know, the new strains and how this might go on for a year or 2 years. We might have this as a kind of, you know, every winter now we won't get the flu, it'll be a sort of COVID type thing or whatever. So how's your city centre of flight of foot that it can suddenly then react to the fact that you suddenly have to have that space again? So again, it's starting to think not just about where we were and, you know, how do we get all the shops filled and how do we get people kind of walking back in and around the city centre. We need to start thinking about how you design that more urban kind of space where people feel comfortable to come in, that we have event space, that the so, you know, maybe one of the attractions is that we need to have, you know, more events in the city centre to try and attract people to come back into the city centre. But also, as I say, for me, one of the challenges will be it has to be future proofed, because what we can't do is, you know, in 18 months time, we've suddenly got to kind of, you know, put interventions back into place. So I think there is now a kind of an open argument around the kind of Union Street and what it might look and feel like as a future space. And how we then kind of look at what that future space becomes. Because I think if you were just to kind of put everything back as was, you know, does that create the feeling of safeness, if there is such a word, for people coming back into the city centre? And we've got to try and encourage that kind of footfall back in the city centre if you want a thriving business community in the city centre, whether that's hospitality, retail, or even the office type based offerings that we have. So for me, this is the prime opportunity. It's really the go or no go, I suppose, point that the city's reaching around Union Street, and I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch unfold.
Steve, George, Steve's just put the question that I was going to put to you in terms of what do we need in the city centre to attract the students? You know, what is it they're looking for? Because as I said, we've discussed how important they are, and to going forward.
In terms of their wider life here, definitely culture, shopping, part-time job opportunities. Of course, many of them are paying fees, and they need to work as well as study. The right kind of accommodation, the right transport system. A lot of them would like to cycle, and our circumstances are not as encouraging for that as we would like them to be. And I know that Steve and his colleagues are working on that, and that's very positive. All of this, of course, relates to a topic we started off on today, which was about energy transition and a focus on sustainability. Every time I have conversations with students or meet them in big meetings like this, the top topic on their agenda is environmental sustainability. So if we're known as a place that really cares about that, that will help us to attract students here and keep them after they've graduated. And many of the things I've mentioned already also apply to retaining the students with us as part of our skilled workforce. We're talking a lot about collaboration across the agencies, which is great, and all of that is really important. But we mustn't forget that our particular excellence and the particular competence we have in our separate organizations is also something that we need to focus on really hard. So it's really great to be focusing on the collaboration, but let's keep on doing the things that we're already excellent at, that we're known for. And in our case, the two universities in the city, both ourselves and RGU, are top 20 for student satisfaction. And that matters a lot to recruiting further students. So making sure that we provide the right programs and the students are happy when they're here will help to bring others and help to keep them once they've graduated.
Nick, I'm conscious of time. I didn't know if you had any other kind of questions from the Q&A before.
I'm slightly worried that we, with 5 minutes ago, lift the plaster on what we do with Union Street. So I suspect, no, I think we've caught most of the ones that have come through the Q&A.
That's possibly a seminar in its own right, I suspect, but so.
Yeah,
seminar would be one word for it.
I was just thought, you know, we've covered a lot of ground, and then I'm going to make it really difficult and then ask each of you if you had one thing that, you know, what you want to have seen happen within the next 10 years, or something that Aberdeen will be known for in 10 years time, you know, what would that be? And Myrtle, I'm going to start with you. What's your one thing?
I still want us to be known as the energy capital of Europe, along with all the skills and the benefit that will bring to the community.
Perfect. Steve?
Well, I'd like Aberdeen to be known as the first winners of the Champions League. I'm not expecting that's likely to happen. So as a second one, I think I would just be looking for, in 10 years, for people to be coming into the city centre and to be sort of proud of it, but also to kind of go, I helped shape that.
Yeah. And George?
I like green energy capital of Europe, but underpinned by diversified knowledge economy, populated by graduates with imagination, creativity, experimentation and innovation. Sorry,
Wow.
That wasn't one thing.
That's a great strapline. Russell?
Going last gives me a bit of a problem, because actually what I was going to say, and I don't know whether this makes us all pretty dull or just really well aligned, is that the 2031 news headlines aren't about how Europe's oil and gas capital failed to grasp the opportunity to be known as a global hub for new energy technologies. But alongside that, and picking up George's point, that we accelerate and have been successful in our economic diversification strategies into food and drink, you know, tourism, life sciences and digital business. And I can get a pint indoors after 6 p.m.
Thank you. I'm going to hand back to you, Nick. I think the strapline that I've taken away from that was something that you said, Myrtle, and it's what we now need to be doing. It's from ambition to action. So, and you know, you've all talked about it needing to be done at pace, and that's kind of where we need to be going now. So, Nick.
Okay, thank you very much. It's just my job to bring this to close by thanking each of our participants, Russell, George, Myrtle, Steve, Elaine. I should give you my thanks as well. I think we've all read this in the open chat bar that our speakers have been described as sensible and eloquent. And I think we kept that all the way through to the end. So thank you very much to them. If everyone can join me in thanking them, I would give my thanks to everyone who has dialed in today. I hope you found that useful. I certainly have. Keep an eye out for future events. I am told that the next one we're hosting is in March, and it comes with the title, The Sea of Opportunity.